Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Good morning, everyone. This is David Parra, and you're listening to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. We have another very, very good radio program today. By the way, if you are joining by radio, please know that you can join our Facebook page at AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. And the name of the show is Arizona's 5 C's. And we added a little bit, +2. So we have la doctora Cordelia Candelaria, and we have Roberto Reveles, and we have Frank Barrios, who are going to help us talk about this important subject. We are going to place emphasis first on the 5 C's, which are so much part of the Arizona history, and then we're going to move to the +2. In other words, 2 additional C's. First of all, welcome, Doctora Candelaria. And again, I'm going to keep reminding you to speak close to the mic so that it captures your voice. Good morning and welcome.
Well, buenos dias, David, Roberto, Frank, and Ulysses, who's our engineer in the studio. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am very honored to be invited to speak on this program, which I've listened to many times. And I thank you.
Yes. Muy buenos dias. My name's Roberto Reveles, and it's a pleasure to be here today to talk about the C's. I happen to have a series of C's that I want to contribute to the conversation as we go along.
Awesome. And obviously, Frank Barrios, you've been with us several times. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you, David. My name is Frank Barrios, and it's always a pleasure to join you here, and especially with such wonderful individuals that you've called here. So thank you.
Thank you. Let me set the stage, so to speak. In 1870, we had 9,000 people in Arizona. In 1880, a decade after, we have 40,000. 1890, 88,000. 1900, 122,000. 1910, very close to when Arizona became a state, 204,000, not even a quarter of a million. In 1920, 334,000. In the 1930s, we reached 435,000. In 1940, we reached 500,000 in Arizona. In 1950, 750,000 people in Arizona. In 1960, 1,300,000. In 1970, 1.7 million. In 1980, 2.7 million. We went from the 70s to the 80s. We increased by 1 million. And then in 1990, we reached 3.6 million. And 2000, 5 million. In 2010, 6+ million people. So we see that Arizona, it keeps growing. But there was a period of time where Arizona really wanted to grow, correct? And that's where this 5 C's come into being. Am I correct?
You are, David, and I thank you for that. Excuse me. I thank you for that excellent sort of. We don't have a chart here, but we can talk about how that curve on the chart would have gone straight up and still keeps going. The 5 C's, anyone who's been in Arizona for a long time has heard of that slogan. But I was an immigrant to Arizona when I was recruited to Arizona State University from the University of Colorado, and I hadn't really been aware of it. And so when I looked it up, I said, oh, the 5 C's. Yes, cattle, citrus, climate, copper, and cotton. Those were the 5 C's, and what they are cash crops. But how did that cash crops that Arizona is proud of, because it is part of the foundation of the Arizona economy. But what I discovered was, as I did the history, as David just did, about the population growth, was that in the 1860s, about the time of the Civil War, and especially afterward, the Land Grant Act that was passed, the U.S. government was very much concerned about populating the West, the new territories, populating the West with people from the East, the Americans from the East side. And so one of the ways they did that was with the concept, the idea of letting people know the big opportunities that were out in the West. And they started to mention the ways that people could have to go out and work in such things as ranching, cattle ranching, in other parts of the West, like in Colorado, sheep ranching, but also in agricultural, citrus orchards, cotton. And then, of course, there were the important, and this was what the government was very interested in, because mining has always been important, and there was copper.
Right.
So that was a slogan that was developed in the late 1800s to attract settlers to the West so they could populate the West.
So was that kind of like an advertisement campaign to showcase, to entice people from the East to come and settle in this rich place that had these 5 C's as engines, if you will, economic engines?
Yes, that's right. But let me just say, it was a combination of things, because not everybody used the 5 C's, not for California. There it was a matter of the weather, the climate, and the ocean, as well as the mining, the gold rush, and so on. In Colorado, it was more about the mining. So it was different for every state. So the 5 C's are very much a part of Arizona. But it was always a matter of the push for settlers to come and populate the country.
I sort of have a different take on the attraction to the Southwest. Keep in mind that it was at a time when Texans and members of the southern states started moving into what was then Mexican territory. And the reason they were able to successfully come in and predominate in the Mexican territory was that Mexico did not have enough people populating these outposts. And so in a way, it set in place the dynamics that are playing out today in the clashes of culture.
So are you saying that it was not just to entice the people from the East, but even people from Mexico were kind of being, if you will, enticed, seeing these opportunities?
Yes, but again, the magnet attracted people from the southern states that were bringing their notions of slavery into a new territory. And so, like I say, it set in motion what we are facing today.
Right. Frank?
When Arizona first, after the war with Mexico, Arizona became and then the Gadsden Purchase, all of Arizona became part of the United States. But in Phoenix, which is you look at Phoenix, you can see what was happening. The majority of people that lived here were Mexicans from Mexico and those that became American citizens after the war. And the population, like Phoenix, 1880, close to half the population was Mexican-American. Then the railroad came in. Once the railroad came in, you had people from all over the United States coming in. Southerners with bringing their biases, and the clashes began because it was difficult to get to Arizona prior to the railroad, because it was the covered wagon or all of these things. But once the railroad was there, it was an open door. And pretty soon, like the Mexican people became minorities. And then they started passing English-only laws, and everybody wanted this to be just like where they came from. And there were very few Mexicans in the South or in the East. So, again, La Liga Protectora was one of the organizations that was created to protect Mexican interests, because there were so many Mexicans that had businesses here and were being pressured by the new laws, by the new people that were coming in. And I guess the Indians could have said the same thing, too.
the need for what they used to call back then los mutualistas, mutual aid societies, came about when there was this huge, after the Land Grant Act started pretty much giving away land for Eastern settlers to take over parcels and come out to the West, not just Arizona, but throughout the West, that there was this one of the unintended consequences was the clash of cultures, because a lot of the immigrants coming from the East did not know that there was all these people here. They weren't educated about it. But,
okay, can you elaborate on that? Because this is an amazing and I think an important point. So you're saying that these people who came, they were enticed by an economic packet, but there was no mention of culture and the peoples that were already here, correct?
Well, let me just point out two things that this is this discussion. Arizona's advertising slogan has been the 5 C's. We've already talked about those. There's a missing two. When I did my research, I discovered why wasn't one of the most important things of Arizona excluded? The Grand Canyon. Now, there's a C that is absolutely so important, and I'll speak to that. And what was the other one that was excluded? La Cultura, culture, was excluded because, and that gets to the point that I wanted to say, there was an existing culture here of people of many different kinds. There were Navajo, Hopi, Apache, the Hispanos, the Mexicans. There were people here that had cultures, religions, languages, and so on. And all of a sudden, these English-speaking folks from that were coming with their land grants and could easily get land and settle and start occupying. They were occupying. They began to feel that bringing their attitudes, and they hadn't been prepared for what they were going to see. You see, one of the Land Grant Act was passed in 1862, and the issue about government distribution in the entire country, the original 13 colonies when there was the revolution against England, there was disputes about land way back in the colonial days, and there were disputes. And then, of course, the South, and of course, we know that the South eventually did not want to cooperate with the North, so they seceded, an act of treason against the Union, and so those issues of land own and who was going to control what you could do on your land was very, very significant, and those attitudes came to the West. So let me just talk about the 5 C's are well known. The two that are missing, the Grand Canyon and culture, are absolutely essential. And let me just say why they're essential. They both have two basic fundamental needs for survival, okay? The water that comes through the canyon that we needed for our irrigation, but we certainly needed for our own drinking. There's another kind of water that is the water for society. It's called knowledge, the knowledge. And one of the things that the immigrants from the East did not recognize was that all of the roads that were here, all of the agricultural crops, the associations with the Native American people, all of those had been built by the existing people who lived here, the Spanish-speaking Mexicanos, Españoles, and they had their systems set up. That's based on knowledge. By overlooking the canyon and the culture, there's two important essentials for the Earth's survival and for human survival.
And we're going to elaborate on the next segments. Roberto, before we go on break, you mentioned the word clash earlier. Can you elaborate and just continue?
Certainly, because I love Dr.
Candelaria.
Her illustration of the Grand Canyon, to me, is a metaphor of what we are living today. The gap between the civic and cultural values of our area. For example, I'll give you a couple of examples, but there's a whole series of examples that I could cite. We are competing and preparing to compete in a more competitive global economy, and yet we are rejecting funding, siphoning funding from public education system to private schools. We're rejecting the presence of skilled dreamers, soñadores. We are wanting to increase the economic commercial trade between Arizona and its largest trading partner, Mexico, sending, in fact, trade missions while also discussing and tolerating the building of a physical border wall. These are the types of gaps that I envision when I think about Grand Canyon.
So is this still related to not in the original promotion, if you will, enticement of economic opportunities, the elements that were already in place in this were not highlighted and they continue to be? Is that what I'm getting?
Well, but it's almost a schizophrenic attraction.
I see.
That we are saying we recognize the need for better technical jobs in but in a community where we are denying the opportunity of expanding our skilled workforce. And we have adopted, for example, an official state policy that says we want to make life so miserable that people will self-deport. That's rejecting the human asset from a competitive framing of an economy.
Arizona, talking about the Grand Canyon and the layers that built the Grand Canyon. Well, the layers of Arizona, Phoenix, all the cities here were built on layers of Mexican labor. And the border, today we talk about a wall, but that border has always been open. People could cross back and forth anytime they wanted. And if you look at the history of the buildings that were built, agriculture, mining, everything is based on Hispanic Mexican labor. And today, who's for Arizona, they are our highest and best trading partner is Mexico. And yet we want to build a wall. And the need for labor, I went to an agricultural meeting the other day. They said they're going to go broke unless they can find labor to help them in agriculture.
We have to go on break. I've been given the signal already. You are listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today is Arizona's 5 C's plus 2. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection, and we're talking about Arizona's 5 C's, which are copper, cattle, cotton, citrus, and climate. 5 pillars of Arizona's original economy, no doubt. And we have our guests today who are bringing in a couple of more concepts that are very unique to Arizona, and that is the Grand Canyon with all its meanings and significance, and also culture, which has been here forever, but that was not part of those 5 C's originally, and that's kind of like what we're talking about today, how critical it is to acknowledge it. Let me just read a few lines that I have here, and then we'll continue with the conversation. The 5 C's supported the Arizona economy. For decades, school children in Arizona have been taught the 5 C's. The 5 C's have been the driving force behind Arizona's economy. They have traditionally been what made our towns and communities grow. They provided jobs and opportunities. The 5 C's gave economic security to past generations and real hope to future generations. All that, however, is changing. Arizona, like the rest of the country, is undergoing an economic transformation. Whole new industries are being created while others die and struggle to survive. So basically, that's the foundation of our subject today. We are addressing these 5 critical pillars of Arizona's original economy. And with the help of our guests, we are bringing in a couple of more C's, two C words, right? Which is canyon, which we refer to the Grand Canyon, and culture. So let's continue the conversation. And again, it's obvious. I mean, I was doing a little bit of research, and when you study the history of Arizona and what copper was huge. I mean, we don't have the time to elaborate on each one of these. But copper, I mean, at one point, Arizona. Why don't we do that? Let's just say a few words about each of these 5, if you don't mind, and then we move into the plus 2. Copper. How big was copper, Frank, in Arizona?
We were the largest producer of copper in the world. Came out of Arizona. And a large majority of the cities that are in Arizona were built around copper mills. So copper, actually, if you put a number on something, and today we're not the largest producer of copper anymore because I think it's coming out of South America. But at one time, we were the king of copper in the world.
Lots of jobs, lots of business.
Lots of jobs, and the cities, you go to Morenci, Clifton, Superior, Miami, Globe, all of these towns, Bisbee, they were all built around the copper industry.
What was being made using copper that made it so necessary?
Copper has always, copper has always been, like other natural resources, one of the mainstays for manufacturing, for machinery, for building machinery. Of course, it's obvious that we also know the copper is made for that wonderful thing that we used to carry around in our pockets, the pennies. And then,
right.
Yeah. So, but copper was an important, as mining in many states has been, whether it's California and gold, whether it's Colorado and silver, but there are also other mines. I have a photograph from the documentary by Paul Espinosa, Dr. Espinosa and Hector Galvan, that was aired on the public broadcasting system, Los Mineros.
Mm-hmm.
And Los Mineros are, because they wanted to do a study about the importance of the Mexican labor force that built the country, particularly the Southwest, and certainly built Arizona. And this picture is from a copper mine in Globe, Arizona. And it's taken from the film Los Mineros. So let me just point up, you asked the question about copper. All of these cash crops, as we call them today, these foundations of the economy, would not have been possible without the fundamental reality of the knowledge and la cultura, the culture that produced the knowledge of how to mine. The Mexicans were mining in Mexico. They were mining as well there, and they brought their techniques. So when the U.S. and the Americans immigrated and Arizona became a state, they were building on knowledge that was already here and had been in process before. So I think that's an important thing to say. That,
yes, definitely.
That just like the Grand Canyon shows by the layers that are visible in the canyon how the earth is made, the parts that come before we see what we see when we have the erosion by the river, that is how knowledge works. All of this past, our history, la lengua que estamos hablando, aunque sea inglés, aunque sea francés, whatever language we're speaking was built by generations of knowledge passed on.
Are you saying that's what the analogy shows with the Grand Canyon?
The comparison, the metaphor that is of the two. Yeah. The reason I use it in creating this approach to studying our history is to show that the metaphor of nature teaches us so much about ourselves as natural beings.
Right.
But oftentimes there are those merchants and those people who only see the shallow part. They only see the surface. If you only see the surface, you'll see the shiny copper penny.
Yes.
You're not going to see that it came out of a mine. If you only see the surface, you're going to see, oh, look at that brown person, look at that black person, look at that female. Oh, you're not going to see that they're a human being. And if you hear a language, speak English, this is America. Well, you're showing your ignorance by being so narrow-minded, because, in fact, these many languages formed the United States of America.
Yeah,
and Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers, so-called, wrote in one of his essays, early on about bilingual education. In my research, he was the first promoter of bilingual education in this country because he was talking about two important languages that were overlooked, two groups of people. The Germans, because there were a lot of German immigrants, and there were the native tribes, and there were several tribes around Virginia and in the East Coast that he said we need to learn their language and they need to learn our English. And so from that point on, we've been talking about the conflicts of language ever since. And unfortunately, in the 20th century, when the concept of bilingual education as a mandate for everybody, especially in the Southwest, there were people who opposed it in their ignorance. So I just say people who see the surface don't know what's at the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
Deeper.
People who don't see the surface, they don't see the culture and the history and how important it is. They only see surfaces. And then the people who govern that way, the people who don't recognize that, and they are, for some reason might be elected or be appointed to office, and they don't have any of this deeper knowledge, they do injustice to the whole society by not recognizing how it's all connected.
Right. How about cattle, obviously big in Arizona? In 1918, Arizona had as many as 1.75 million head of cattle, providing beef to the nation. How about cotton? I think cotton is where a lot of people identify with cotton because a lot of people work in those fields. Actually, Anita Ritter, who is joined our show before, she wrote to me and says, I work in those fields. Frank?
Oh, yeah, no, cotton, again, we were one of the leaders. I'm not sure we were number one, but at one time cotton was coming out of the South. And then they found out the weather here in Arizona was perfect. You go to Casa Grande, you go to the Phoenix area, everywhere where agriculture is, cotton was king. They had the infrastructure that was needed to grow cotton was developed all through the state. So there was ways to not only grow the cotton, but get it into trains and transfer it out of the state. And you know, they couldn't grow cotton every year on the same land, on the same property, so they would alternate. They would do wheat one year and then go back to cotton.
What relationship is there between cotton and the name Goodyear?
Good question. You know, during World War II, the Army came to Chandler and started growing cotton for the war effort, and Chandler grew a huge in that area. That was the first cotton by the Goodyear plant. The Goodyear plant went to the Chandler area and started growing cotton, and then later transferred to where Goodyear is today. But the first effort, and it was because of World War II, they were growing cotton. They needed cotton. It was a product used in the war. And so they started in Chandler, then moved to Goodyear, and
I think they also used cotton for strengthening the tires.
I think so. There was a lot of things that cotton was. It wasn't usually we think of cotton for clothes. This was for the war effort. Is what they were growing cotton for.
Right.
And Goodyear moved from Chandler to where Goodyear is today. And the whole idea was to grow cotton for the war effort.
I have two comments to make about cattle and cotton. Cattle were important as ranching, obviously, a part of agriculture. But the part that is also true is that because human culture evolves, that cattle ranching in Arizona became very much associated with the movies, with Hollywood movie, the industry, because what happened is you got cowboys and Indians, you have vaqueros, as you point out, and we all know that Arizona has been a movie set for staging some of the very well-known successful westerns, Hollywood movie westerns. So that's one thing to say about how it evolves. The other thing about cotton is that just let's remember, the highest producer of cotton in the world in the 19th and 18th century, the 1700s, 1800s, was The South, the U.S. South. And it was done by slave labor. Just think of that, slave labor.
So you keep coming back to the layers, seeing more than the
that's
obvious, right?
And so a lot of what we know here in the cotton was that there was a need by both in terms of the industry, but government and especially the military. Cotton is used for I think the word is batting material. It's B-A-T-T-I. It's a stuffing that's used as an insulation, as an insulatory for machinery in the military and for weaponry. But the other part that I understand is cotton seed is also used. The oil is also used as a lubricant.
The Hohokam grew cotton in Arizona forever. You go back to when Christ was in Israel. They were growing cotton here in Arizona.
That makes a big point. Thank you so much. We have to go on our second break. You're listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today is Arizona's 5 C's plus 2. And we invited Marcelino Quiñones to join us. He is working and he can only join by phone, and he has very limited time, but we still want to give him an opportunity to say a few words. Marcelino, are you on the phone?
David, how are you?
Doing well, Marcelino. We're going to have to do another show where you are available. We would have loved to have you in person here. I understand you have limited time. Would you mind just sharing some concepts? I know you've been busy. I don't know if you have been listening to the show about the 5 C's plus 2. You and I worked or talked on the phone over the week. So feel free to share a few thoughts.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, David and AARP, for having this program that extends and advances the cause of the Latino community. And then, of course, saludos to Cordelia, Roberto, and Mr. Frank Barrios. In essence, my role here today is to talk about the intergenerational leadership that takes place with the 5 C's plus 2. Cordelia, for many years, has advocated the advancement of culture and education and community. And so now with this new program, with this new concept of the 5 C's plus 2, it's a step in the right direction. And let me speak just momentarily about the canyon concept and the idea of layering and the idea that a canyon doesn't just spring up and happen. There's different layers that take place in order for a canyon to reach that height. That's kind of like people, right? So we have individuals that have come before us that have been a part of the layering so that eventually we can stand the way we stand. But I wanted to call and just tell you how excited I am that this type of work and these types of conversations are taking place.
Thank you so much, Marcelino. Any comments, any questions, Cordelia, about his sharing?
Mil gracias, Marcelino. You've made all the right concepts, and someone like you who has worked with people and are working now at St. Vincent de Paul in training and helping people in the community, you know very well all those layers and how important that is in order to provide the assistance that the people need.
Yes.
Thank you, Marcelino, because I think that what we've discussed up until now, the traditional 5 C's, are simply a prelude to today's 5 C's that I would suggest would, in my 5 C's would be community in constant civic crisis and challenge. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that we need to deal with today in the culture clash that we see today. A climate in which we are seeing the need to retain assets, not the traditional ones, but the new generation, the new layer of citizens trying to engage in civic activities.
Let me just make sure that Marcelino is taken care of before we continue the conversation. Marcelino, do you have to go now?
I do. Unfortunately, I'm being called here.
Yes.
We've got a number of volunteers that are advancing the work that we're talking about in terms of helping people and providing opportunities for growth and for learning. But I wanted to call in and make sure that our community understands that this is an intergenerational conversation, that individuals from multiple generations are in agreement with Dr. Cordelia's studies and research, and we're out here trying to do our part to advance that work.
Thank you so much. Frank has a few words, and then thank you for joining. We'll connect later on.
Okay, Marcelino, I want to tell you how proud we are of the work that you're doing for St. Vincent de Paul. We really appreciate that. And just to let everybody know, Marcelino heads up a program that gives scholarships to young people who need help in getting education that don't have the money to do it. And Marcelino, you're doing a fantastic job, and I can just tell you we're all very proud of what you're doing. Thank you, Marcelino.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Board President. David, Cordelia, Roberto, un abrazo fuerte a todos y para adelante.
Thank you so much.
Gracias.
Thanks. Okay, so now let's devote the remainder of the time to this. Before we do, I just have to say that citrus was also another item, and then the climate, because Arizona has the concept of the snowbirds, right? That people that live in very, very cold weather during the winter, they come to our state, and the climate was another enticement, right? And actually still is an enticement to many people to come to Arizona because their winter is our summer, right? And we have such great weather from November to about March. You can't beat it. Frank?
I was just going to say, when you were talking about the population growth, somewhere in there they discovered air conditioning. That's when the big growth began.
Oh, I see. Especially during the summer months.
During the summer month. But also, why is California one of the largest populated states? Because they have this beautiful climate year-round. But we do have a beautiful climate during the winter, and winter visitors come here that helps. You say climate, maybe tourism.
Some people have two homes, right? They spend time here. Now, let's focus now on this. I'm beginning to sense that this concept of the Grand Canyon with the layers, that you strongly feel that with everything around us and when it comes to people, issues, that there's always different layers, and that we need to go deeper into the understanding of culture, the understanding of people, the understanding of one another. Am I getting it right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, this almost feels as if it was scripted, like I knew you were going to say that, which I didn't. But that's an absolutely appropriate way to talk about the fact that when we're talking about climate, yes, we're talking about the temperatures, the ambient temperatures around us, whether we have snowfall or rainfall or heat, and of course Arizona is known for our summer heat. But climate is also a matter of, and I'm going to get to your point, David. Climate is also a matter about a social climate, about the interactive and communal climate among people. We all know when you enter a place and there's a climate of hostility or of unfriendliness. We all know when you enter a climate que está muy amable, muy agradable in terms of a climate of welcoming, que estás en su casa. And we know many of the phrases that we grow up in, those of us who are bilingual, about the idea is it's sharing and it's really communal. So I want to keep in mind that when we talk about climate, I am meaning the climate of the 5 C's. But once you add cultura and canyon and those layers that are so important, you realize that if we observe nature, as in the water and the canyon and the layers and so on, we might be more, and we respect nature and we take care of it, as opposed to some who would want to destroy the things that protect nature, that would want to make, in fact, there's been very adamant, active lobbyists wanting to do more mining in the canyon in order to, and of course that's not very helpful in terms of respecting nature.
Okay, let's do our last break, and then we'll come back. And I'm going to pose a question for our last segment. It's, what is a more balanced approach? We seem to have this economic concepts, but then there's also this cultural, human elements that need to be combined for a better society. So I'll put that in before you for discussion. Thank you for staying with us. You're listening to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today is Arizona's 5 C's plus 2. And let's pick up the conversation. I believe we all want a better society, and I believe these 5 original C's did an amazing job economically. I think there's no doubt about that. But we've taken the analogy or metaphor of the Grand Canyon in the aspects of layers after layers that can be seen to kind of point to the fact that everything has more than one layer, and that culture is an important part. What was here already in place when migrations to our state were taking place is super important. So what? How can we move forward? What would it take to acknowledge both and create a better society? What could we say in our final segment about that in closing?
Okay, I'll just say 2 things. Obviously, it is ganas, that is the desire to do better, and one path to that is education. This program, through using public media, radio, as well as social media for educational purposes, to not accept what is just an obvious, superficial, surface concept about anything. Look beneath the surface to see what really matters and how that happened, just as you did your research. And when I developed this research on Arizona's 5 C's, I didn't call it +2. I like the positiveness of +2. I called it the missing 2, because my entire, and I'm not 100 years old yet, but close, my entire life has been to fill the gaps that have been missing in the teaching of literature, history, and culture throughout in all the fields that I study, whether it's medieval studies, the earliest medieval studies, as well as American literature, and so on. As a founder of Chicano Studies at the University of Arizona State University, now the School of Transborder Study, I want to find the gaps and fill them with knowledge. Fact-based evidence was the way to path forward. The other piece of it, of course, is that you have to correct the distortions that existed. The idea that only people of privilege did great things, that only white males did great things, that because somebody is elected to the highest office in their country, whatever country it is, that they're going to do great things. We have to wait and judge it by the facts and the evidence, not by what they tell us they're going to do.
Real quick, and just real quick because of time, can you tell the audience your credentials in terms of you have a doctorate, correct?
Yes, I have a doctorate in 2 fields, structural linguistics and American literature. I have 2 master's degrees, one in English literature and in medieval studies, and 2 bachelor's degrees, one in French and one in English. I am also a Regents Professor Emerita at Arizona State University. But the most important thing I'm a mother and a grandma and a great-grandma, and that would not be myself without those parts.
And I wanted to talk about just a little bit. Roberto, again, how do we move forward as a society, as Arizonans, with these concepts of culture, these concepts of economics, etc.?
Succinctly, I think we move forward by filling the Grand Canyon gap that exists by those who preach about our core values and those who actually practice their core values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Frank, again, let me say this. I spoke with my boss, and this is in the works. I said, Dana, I would like to do a show where I bring an African American, a Native American, and a Hispanic American, and an Anglo-Saxon American that have basically gone beyond race and have accepted realities and have managed to coexist. And she liked the idea. So who knows? That may be a show coming up. But Frank, I think we all want a better society, but there's some elements that need to work out for that to happen.
Well, I think what Roberto just said is absolutely the facts, the truth, the history of how we got to where we're at. Yeah. In politics, they call it spin, which is another way of saying I'm going to lie to you so you vote for me. I shouldn't say that too loud, but it's well, what I'm saying is we've got to tell the truth about how Arizona was developed. The Mexican heritage of this state is huge, and yet all we can talk about is people crossing the border illegally. No, people are people. We've got to learn the truth, accept it, and then go forward. And we could have a much better society once we accept the truth. But what we do is we hold on to lies because it feeds the predetermined idea of what we want. And we got to stop that. And you start in the schools. Maybe we need to, in the schools, start teaching about the heritage of Arizona, the people that were there before, the Native American, the Mexicans, the Mexican-Americans, and maybe when those kids become adults, we'll have a better world. But it's very hard once you have people that are they'll only accept the truth they want to accept, and many times that's a lie. So we've got to do a better job.
That's the education is so important. This research is about the 5 C's that are positive, had a good effect. But it's also about the missing 2, and it is the missing 2 and how we incorporate them, and that we show everything that has been said. Do away with the hypocrisy and the spin, and do away with simply a very superficial teaching. Teach the facts that are based and their roots.
Exactly.
Now, who needs to be educated in all this? Because you say educate, but who needs to be educated?
We all need to be educated. Those of us who have benefited from being born in this wonderful country, but also in informing and educating those who come to our country so that they can be positive contributors to society. And one way to do that is to allow freedom of inquiry instead of what was recently overruled by the federal courts that said, Tucson School District, you must not outlaw the teaching of Mexican-American studies.
Nor do you outlaw or affect in any way the deferred action for childhood arrivals. The dreamers who came here and who are as American as anybody here, but they came as children. And the DACA students, the dreamers, that has to be protected because that is going on the right path.
Education and communication, would we say? It's very much needed to continue the conversation and to continue educating ourselves to know the history of our country, know the history of Arizona, so that it'll lay a good foundation to understanding each other and moving into a more civil society, more a society that takes care of everyone in it. We've come to the end of our show. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be back next week. Thank you so very much. Have a great day. This was AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection.